They're all coming in now. Perfect. Well, I'll get started because I think most of you have heard my spiel already. But hi, my name is Katrina Schlicker. I'm the Environmental Education Coordinator with Rivers Conservancy. We're very excited today for our presentation of water quality in the watershed. It's going to be about 50 minutes, and I'll be in the background moderating the chat, helping with any technical difficulties, and just being around. So if you need anything, feel free to go into the chat. You are more than welcome if the volume's too loud or you can't see anything, that's where you're going to message. For any questions you have throughout the whole presentation, there's that Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and press that. We'll get to all those questions at the end. So even if you have a question about 2 minutes in, feel free to put it in, but we won't answer it until the end. Just so you know, this session is recorded. It'll be made permanently available on our Wild Rivers Conservancy YouTube account. And with all of that out of the way, I would like to introduce our speaker, Jade Ryerson from, and I always mess this one up, so please correct me, Mississippi National River and Recreation Area.
That was great.
Excellent.
Okay. I'm gonna share my screen and then we can get started. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for that introduction. Hi, everyone. Once again, my name is Jade Ryerson, and I'm a historian with the National Park Service. As you may know, the National Park Service protects and cares for special places throughout the United States. And I'm excited to talk to you about two of those very special places today. So every national park has something that makes it unique and special, whether that be the plants and animals there or the people who lived, worked, and played there in the past. As national parks, these places aren't just important to people who live in the local area. They hold importance for the entire United States. So some of you may have heard or even visited some of those larger, well-known parks like Yellowstone with its geysers and hot springs, or Yosemite with its waterfalls and giant sequoia trees. The national park that I work at is focused on the Mississippi River, one of the most important rivers in the world. It's known for being a major route for travel and trade, and you can see a bird's eye view of the Mississippi River in downtown Minneapolis in the photo on the top right of the screen. The map that's on the left side, you can see where the Mississippi River starts in northern Minnesota as it snakes its way down towards the Minnesota-Wisconsin border, towards its meeting place with the St. Croix River. And since we're here today for the St. Croix Youth Summit, I would imagine that you already know about the St. Croix River and how important it is. Maybe some of you even visit or recreate there often. Because the St. Croix is so important, it's also been protected as a national park, along with its largest tributary, the Namakagon River. So the Namakagon's up here. The Namakagon and St. Croix are known for their free-flowing clear waters. So this photo at the bottom right shows a view of the St. Croix River in Osceola, Wisconsin. And on the top right, you can see a view of the Namakagon. The place where two rivers meet is called a confluence. And my background on the first slide had a photo of the confluence of the St. Croix and Mississippi Rivers, but you may not have been able to see it very well behind all of the text that was on that slide. So next, we're going to take a closer look at the confluence in the form of a time-lapse video. And as we watch, I want you to take a moment to think about what you're seeing. Okay, so we're going to take a moment and watch this clip, and hopefully it comes through clearly for you. Oops, maybe I have to keep my cursor up here. Okay, so what do you notice about the water that's in this video? There's a channel on the left, and that comes from the Mississippi River, and then the channel on the right comes from the St. Croix River. One thing you might have noticed is that the St. Croix waters are very blue, but the water in the Mississippi River is a lot murkier. And you can really see that difference in the swirling of the water when the rivers blend together right here. So why do you think the water looks like that? And what do you think the color of a river says about its water quality? These are some of the questions that we're going to explore throughout the rest of our time together today. Okay, so this slide just shows another bird's eye view of where the St. Croix and Mississippi rivers meet, but this time the St. Croix is on the left and the Mississippi is on the right. And I'm just including it again to emphasize that sharp color contrast. So what's muddying the waters? There's actually quite a lot of things. Some are caused by humans and some are caused by the natural environment. We're going to go through some of those causes one by one, but I want you to know that a lot of the factors that make the Mississippi and St. Croix rivers look so different are actually very interconnected. Let's start with one important environmental factor. Okay, so the particles of sand, silt, or clay that are floating in a river are called sediment. In the case of the Mississippi River, these particles can also include minerals like iron ore and manganese. They give the river a rust-like color that sort of looks like brewed tea. But it can be kind of hard to see that color through all the other sediment that muddies up the waters. Some sediment is totally normal and comes from the clay or soils along the bottom or sides of a river. But too much of a good thing can have a negative impact too. By clouding up the river water, sediment can block sunlight, which aquatic plants that live at the bottom of a riverbed need to grow. Both the St. Croix and the Mississippi River have sediment, but the St. Croix's riverbed is naturally very flat. So this makes it very easy for dirt and other sediment to settle along the bottom, leaving the rest of the water clean and clear. So if you look at this painting over here on the left-hand side, let's just mention it's just an artistic representation, but you can see how calm the waters look even there. It's an old painting, so that gives us some clues about how people have thought about the river over time. On the other hand, over on the right side, the Mississippi River moves a lot faster and has waterfalls. So this makes the water much choppier. In the painting on the right, you can see St. Anthony Falls, which is the only natural waterfall on the Mississippi River. Dakota people, who have lived along the river for thousands and thousands of years, even call the waterfall Owamni, which means turbulent waters. So for thousands of years, people have been referring to those choppy waters in the Mississippi River. The turning of the waterfall disturbs the sand and sediment in the river and prevents it from settling along the bottom. And that helps to make the Mississippi River look a lot murkier. So now that you know about sediment, you might think we've got our answer. But there's more to understanding water quality than might first meet the eye. When scientists from the National Park Service test water quality, they can look at a river's color as a sign of how clear the water is. But some pollutants don't have any color at all, or are too small for the human eye to pick out. And aside from what's in the rivers themselves, the surrounding areas of land can have a big impact too. So rivers are affected by the water that flows into them and the areas of land that they flow through. The networks of streams and tributaries that flow directly into a river is called a watershed. The watershed is also made up of all the areas of land that drain into a river. So even rainfall or melting snow from miles and miles away can have a huge impact. And so this slide has another video, and we're going to take a look at the watershed of the Mississippi River. Let's just take a moment, and hopefully this will do up easily. Okay, so I'm going to back this up again, and hopefully there's not too much of a delay with what you're seeing. But when we start off with this video, you've got that main branch of the Mississippi River represented in darker blue. And then as we continue on, you get the streams and tributaries that all flow into the Mississippi River in lighter blue. And then finally, we've got this shaded area representing the entire watershed. So you can see how all of the water that flows over this entire area of land for a significant portion of the United States all of that water draining over those areas of land, it ends back up into the main branch of the Mississippi River. And so the St. Croix and Namakagon are part of this too, because the Namakagon flows into the St. Croix and the St. Croix flows into the Mississippi River. So the St. Croix watershed also makes up part of that larger Mississippi River watershed. So I'm showing you this slide again from before so that you can take a look at this map of the St. Croix River's watershed shaded in yellow. You can also see how the smaller watersheds of its tributaries, the Snake, Kettle, and Namakagon rivers, also drain back into the St. Croix. So now that we know that areas of land and water that make up a watershed have an impact on the rivers they drain into, let's take a moment and think about how that might apply to the water quality of the Mississippi and St. Croix rivers. Okay, so on this slide, we've got images of the St. Croix and the Mississippi. And I showed those images a few slides back, but now they're bigger so that you can really take a good look at them. I'm going to give you about a minute to look at them. And as you look, I want you to think about 3 things that you notice. And so I'm going to take a look at my watch, and then we'll do about a minute starting now. Okay, so that's going to round out our minute, but you can still feel free to keep looking as we're on this slide. Okay, but now that we've all had a good long time to think about these images, let's talk through some of the things that you might have noticed. So first off, the Mississippi River is flowing through a city. You can see bridges and roads along the Mississippi River and around it, and they've all got these hard, flat surfaces. Now, to be fair, you can also see a bridge over here over the St. Croix, but overall, the area that's around the St. Croix, it's a lot less developed. You can't see individual houses or buildings in this image over here on the right. But you can see more natural changes in elevation and that the river is lined with a lot of forested area. So while it's true, there's some green space over here along the Mississippi as well, but the land along the St. Croix is a lot more natural, and you've got these big trees. And you might also have noticed the Mississippi River's got a waterfall, and the St. Croix's waters look a lot calmer, at least in these 2 photos. So remember what we talked about earlier about how areas surrounding and draining into a river affect the river's water quality? All these things that you noticed, and things that you might have noticed and more, have an impact on the water quality of the Mississippi and St. Croix rivers. And since we already talked about the impact of the waterfall, or not having a waterfall, let's take a deeper dive into some of those other factors. Okay, we're going to start with land cover. So when water falls from the sky or as snow or rain and then melts as snow, it makes its way through the watershed. The land cover makes a big difference because the water is passing through the surrounding environments until it reaches back to a river or another body of water. Floodplain forests and wetlands, like you can see over here in this picture on the right, naturally protect water quality. These natural forests have trees and shrubs and other plants with really strong root systems. And all those roots soak up and store a lot of water. As they soak up the water, the plants act as natural filters and absorb that water back into the ground. Now, the roots of wetland plants also help to hold natural soils in place. But if forests are cut down and wetlands are removed, it becomes easier for soils to wear away or erode from stream banks and fall back into the river. So you can see how that's happening in this image here on the slide. You can see where the soil starting to fall away back into the river. So those loose soils, after they fall into the river, they're washed away, and it makes the water look a lot murkier. Some stream bank erosion is totally natural, but too much can be destabilizing. So let's look back at this image again. When we think back to land cover along the St. Croix in Mississippi, it's clear how these forested areas along the St. Croix are doing a lot to keep extra sediment out. All the natural trees and land cover that you can see in this image are absorbing water before it ever ends up back in the river. So you can only imagine how clean and clear the waters of the Namakagon are, since the lands along its banks are even more wild and undeveloped. Okay, but in addition to erosion, removing wetlands and floodplain forests can have other negative impacts on water quality. Okay, when there's more rainfall or snowmelt than the ground can absorb, there's leftover water that stays on the surface and it runs over the ground. Fittingly, this extra water is called runoff. And runoff can help explain how other contaminants end up in rivers and make water quality worse. So when we think back to those two photos comparing the Mississippi and St. Croix, the Mississippi River flows through not one, but two major cities. They have more people, more buildings, and more industry. So there's that photo again. It's only showing Minneapolis, but as you go further downstream, the Mississippi River also flows through St. Paul. Structures like roads and bridges and buildings like houses and schools are a lot different than wetlands. These man-made structures are impermeable, which means they're made up of materials that can't absorb water or let it pass through easily. In a lot of cases, those structures are specifically designed to drain away water from the places where people are living and working. And so you can see some examples of those hard surfaces in this snapshot of downtown Minneapolis. But you might be wondering, when the water drains away, where does all that extra water go? Well, people have designed special systems to redirect the extra runoff back into our waterways. And these are called stormwater management systems. You might be most familiar with one part of stormwater management, sewers. But sewers aren't just carrying water with them. As runoff makes its way back to the stormwater system and eventually back to the river, it flows over the roofs of buildings and flows over driveways and roads and people's lawns. And as the runoff is making this journey, it's picking up waste and other contaminants along the way. So I'm choosing to show this image again that we looked at before. And I just want you to think about all of the surfaces that the rainwater that's falling from the clouds here. Just think about all the surfaces that the rainwater is flowing over and what it might be picking up along the way. As you can see, some of this water is draining down into this stormwater drain there. And you can see how water is pulling from the driveway and ending up back in the drain as well. You can even see some trash here down in the sewers. Okay, so now we're going to get a little bit more specific. So one example of things that the water might be picking up includes chemicals from the salt that we lay down on roads to melt snow and ice in the wintertime. Another way is waste materials that come from our yards, like grass clippings, leaf litter, and pet waste. And garbage and recyclable materials can also end up in our sewers. But those physical things like cans and bottles and other trash can be a lot easier to pick out than chemicals or organic waste. When you have an area that's covered in natural habitat, grass clippings and leaf litter, all that can decompose and be absorbed back into the ground by the roots of wetland plants. And once that waste is absorbed into the ground, it can return to the earth as nutrients for those plants. But remember that in cities, there's a lot more hard surfaces that can't absorb or even repel water, in addition to having fewer green and natural spaces. And as a result of all of that, that waste ends back up in the stormwater system and gets pushed back out into our waterways. And it can be harmful to the plants and animals that are living there. But forests and wetlands aren't just removed to build cities. In many cases, land along rivers is also developed for farmland. Lots of farmland is naturally made up of plants too, either for agricultural fields or grasses for animals to graze on. But crops and pastures can't absorb as much water as trees in a floodplain forest. They just don't need it. And in some cases, being steeped in too much water can actually hurt the plant's growth. So for that reason, some farms have specifically designed their fields to drain lots of runoff, especially so that their crops won't drown when there's a flood. And you can really see a good example of that in this photo on the bottom right. You can see how much water is draining out of these agricultural fields during a really heavy rain. And because the soils are looser in agricultural fields, that draining water will also carry soils back into the river and make the water look visibly cloudier. Okay, since we're talking about watersheds today, I'm going to give you this brief real-life example. The Minnesota River is another important tributary of the Mississippi River. And between the 1940s and 1970s, lots of land along the Minnesota River was developed as farmland. And to this day, there's still a lot of agricultural runoff in the Minnesota River. And that's why it looks really murky in that photo. So you can really start to see murkiness in the Mississippi River below its confluence with the Minnesota. So up here, even though the Mississippi is still pretty dark, this is when it really starts to look cloudy. And this is north of where it meets the St. Croix as well. So you can see all that agricultural runoff in the Minnesota River very clearly as it's going downstream. But aside from making rivers look cloudy or murky, sediment can make water quality worse because it can carry other pollutants with it. And these can be the kinds of pollutants that don't have any color or are too small for people to see. And so we're going to go through a pretty specific example right now. When farmers are trying to help their crops grow, they will often add fertilizers that contain nutrients like phosphorus or nitrogen to their fields. But as runoff is passing through those farm fields, it's picking up those excess nutrients and carrying it back into the river, which then damages river ecosystems. So this slide is showing that process of how extra phosphorus and nitrogen in the water can be damaging to the plants and animals that are living in the river. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about that process in a second. So it might be strange to think of a nutrient as harmful, but as we've already mentioned, too much of a good thing can still be harmful too. Okay, so here's our specific example. Algae are a type of aquatic life. And you might have seen these big green clusters floating on the surfaces of rivers, lakes, and other bodies of water. Those clusters are called algae blooms. Algae needs phosphorus and nitrogen to grow, but having too much of those nutrients in the water can help the algae to grow too fast. And so when too many algae are growing on the surface of a river or another body of water, it can block out sunlight and prevent those other forms of aquatic life that are living in the river from getting the oxygen that they need to survive. And so that's the process that we saw illustrated on the previous slide. It's important to keep algae from growing too fast because all plants and animals are playing a unique role within healthy river ecosystems. So when everything's not able to get what it needs to survive, it throws everything off balance. In particular, there's one animal that has an especially important job in keeping river ecosystems healthy. That animal is the mussel. Freshwater mussels are a unique type of aquatic creature that live in rivers and help us understand a lot about water quality. They've got a soft body that's protected inside a hard two-part shell. And you might have already heard about them a lot in a presentation earlier this week. So I'm just going to go over the high-level details. Mussels need good water quality to survive. So if we know that there's mussels that are living in an area, we know that the water quality has to be pretty good there. But aside from needing clean water for their own survival, freshwater mussels also give back and do their part to filter the water and keep it clean. That's the superpower of mussels. So as filter feeders, they're taking in food and filtering many, many gallons of water to remove algae and bacteria. And so in the process of removing those algae and bacteria, they're removing nutrients that they need for food, and they're also helping to clean the water and improve water quality for other aquatic life. So let's take a look at the tanks in the image on this slide. The water in the tank on the left started out just as murky as the water in the tank on the right. This tank is a lot cleaner because of the mussels that are present. Mussels can filter up to 15 gallons of water per day. And if you think about a standard gallon of milk or seen our jug of milk, a single mussel can filter up to 15 of those. And that's a lot for a single mussel when they're not that big. But mussels aren't just sitting in a riverbed by themselves. They live in clusters called mussel beds. So when you've got thousands to millions of mussels working together, they can filter huge amounts of water. Mussels are actually doing their job so well that engineers in Minneapolis are actually putting them to work. Because humans don't have this natural cleaning and filtering ability that mussels do, we've had to design facilities to treat the water and make it safe and clean for humans to use. So the mussels there, you can see in this picture, are at the drinking water treatment plant in Minneapolis. So all day, every day, they're sitting in this tank, and the tank is continually pulling in water from the Mississippi River. Now, normally the mussel shells stay open a little bit so they can filter water and get their food. But if the mussels sense contaminants like gasoline or heavy metals that are in the water, they're going to snap their shells closed. And that sets off tiny sensors that are attached to their shells, and it alerts the engineers that there's something wrong. So you can actually see how the mussel shells are kind of hooked up to that system and the sensors in these photos. But wastewater and water engineers aren't the only ones that are working hard to protect the rivers, to keep them clean, and to care for the species that are living there. Okay, so I've talked a lot about how people can have a negative impact on water quality today, but people can also have a positive impact too, and have. Conservation and resource management are a major reason why water quality in the Mississippi River is so drastically different than water quality in the St. Croix. In 1968, which was almost 60 years ago, scientists and environmental advocates and lawmakers all came together to protect the St. Croix and Amakagan rivers as a national park. The park was founded to ensure that exceptional qualities that made the rivers wild and scenic wouldn't change and that future generations could continue to enjoy them. Now, this was 20 whole years before scientists, environmental advocates, and lawmakers all came together to protect 72 miles of the upper Mississippi River as a national park. Because the Namakagon, St. Croix, and Mississippi rivers are national park units, there are a lot of people who are working to protect the rivers and the species that live there every day. They're studying the rivers, how the rivers support life, and all the ways that water quality is affected. They also do work to prevent land along the river from being developed. They work to restore natural habitats, and they create opportunities for everyone to enjoy the rivers. And that makes a really big difference. I'm going to give you a very specific example. So before European settlers arrived, the Mississippi River, St. Croix, and Amakagan rivers were all home to 41 species of mussels. But by the late 1800s, there were no more mussels living in the Mississippi River because of how polluted it was. The St. Croix has a history of some pollution too, and was once just as industrialized as the Mississippi River. And that was primarily from the lumber industry. And so in this photo, you can see how densely packed timbers were as they were floating down from the white pine forests of northern Wisconsin to sawmills on the lower St. Croix. They're so densely packed, people could actually walk from bank to bank on those logs. And yet the St. Croix and the Amakagan have remained home to all 41 mussel species. That large number of mussel species that live in the St. Croix and Amakagan play a critical role in making sure the water quality of those rivers continue to stay excellent. As we talked about before, the mussels are one of the main reasons why the St. Croix and Amakagan rivers are protected as a national park too. The Mississippi River has seen the return of 29 mussel species from zero. So now we're back to 29, but that's only after many years of work to clean up the river, many years of scientific research, and efforts to reintroduce those mussels to the river. Okay, so as we end our time together, I'm going to show you some footage from a National Park Service aquatics biologist. And the footage shows both above and below the waterline of the Namakagon, St. Croix, and Mississippi rivers. Let's take a look at this. And I might point out some specific species of aquatic animals that you're seeing along the way. Okay, so we've got a crayfish. There's also like some stonefly larvae nymphs, smallmouth bass, got a pistol grip, another type of mussel, treehorn. And those are 3 different depths of the Mississippi. Okay, and last here we've got some rangers, a malacologist and a ranger, and they're recording some mussel survey data. Okay, I'm going to back this up actually a little bit, just as we talk through this. Okay, so in this video that we just watched, you might have noticed that it's a lot harder to see underwater as we looked at the Namakagon and then the St. Croix and then the Mississippi. So as we learned today, the color of the river isn't everything, but it is a big factor in helping us understand water quality. And so when we think about the efforts that people that work at the National Park Service and other partner agencies, we can think about how their efforts make a big difference in taking these different rivers and cleaning them up and taking care of them, and how that makes a really big difference. Because when you looked at these parts of the Mississippi, even from this depth of 14, where you can barely see anything, to 5 feet away, which is not that far from the surface, it's really murky and you really can't see anything. But here you can see a little bit better in the St. Croix. But in the Namakagon, everything is like crystal clear. Okay, so just go back to the beginning now. Let's see if I can. Okay, so when you think, why should I care about water quality? I want you to ask yourself and think about, how do you interact with these rivers? Where are you getting your drinking water from? Where do you go fishing or paddling? Even if you're not getting your water directly from the Mississippi or St. Croix River, the water that you drink still comes from the watershed. And because of all the potential contaminants that we've talked about today, it takes a lot of work to keep the rivers clean and safe and healthy. And the rivers are taking care of us, so we have a big responsibility to keep them clean and healthy too. All right, well, thank you so much for your time today and attention. I think we still got some time left over, so I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the Mississippi River or the St. Croix watersheds, what it's like to be a historian or the national parks. I'm all ears. I'll stop sharing. Yeah.
Yeah, that was wonderful, Jade. I haven't had a presentation that really succinctly put all 3 rivers together and talked about how they're all similar but different.
Yeah, it was an interesting topic for me to dive into too.
Well, I know I have a question as we're waiting for oh, there we go. First question came in. Can you swim in the water if there are algal blooms?
Hmm. Um, I think it depends. I mean, I'm not someone that like is one of those water quality testers. And so I would say that it probably depends on the extent of how much of that, how many of those blooms are present. So if you've got a river that's like covered in all of them, it's probably pretty yucky for you to go in there. In addition to being not great for the aquatic species that are living there. But I would look into that more. But I would say probably you shouldn't. But maybe that's just me and my tolerance for yeah.
Yeah, I know usually if it's a harmful algal bloom, usually there's plenty of signs that tell you not to go in the water.
Right.
So, um, as we're waiting for more questions, I was really curious how you got into being a historian for the Park Service.
Yeah. Yes. So as you might have noticed, a lot of this presentation was very like science-based, and for me it was kind of different. So most of the time, my job is more focused on the stories that are associated with the park, and taking care of the places that can tell us about the past of the park. This was exciting for me to dive into. But I started out when I was in school just being really curious about the past and how knowing about places that are around us can kind of help people better understand themselves and give us a sense of change over time. And being able to see yourself, I think, in the place that you live is really important, and being able to
Yeah.
resonate with those stories. And so when I was looking for opportunities to do that career-wise, I was started doing internships with the National Park Service. I started out writing a lot about historic places and people for the National Park Service website, and that those internships kind of led me to a career with the Park Service.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, I have a couple questions. Has it helped the water quality of the Mississippi after the 29 species of mussels have been reintroduced, and is there hope?
Is there hope? Um, I think there's always hope as long as people are committed to, wanting to improve the conditions somewhere. Um, yes, I would say that, like we talked about the mussels, they need good water quality to survive in a place. And they also contribute to making the water quality better as they're eating and cleaning and filtering the water. So yes, having those 29 species of mussels back, has done a lot. And it also tells us the Mississippi River is doing a lot better too. So yes, there is hope.
Always good to hear. Um, how many different species are in the rivers? I don't know if that species of mussels are just all species.
Um, all species would be probably more than I could wrap my head around. I know that there's the 41 mussel species in the St. Croix and Namakagon, and then there's 29 mussel species in the Mississippi River. And there's probably some overlap in the ones that live in both of those places.
Yeah, for sure. Why is the Namakagon cleaner than the St. Croix?
The Namakagon is a lot further upstream. So I think that again, I'll say, as much as I am presenting on this topic, I'm not one of the people that normally does this kind of job. And so my suspicion is, if you when you look at, so I'm not going to answer your question directly. I'm going to give you a different, we'll get to the answer to the question you asked. When you think about the Mississippi, for example, when you look up at the headwaters by Lake Itasca, it's a lot cleaner and more pure. But by the time you get below, especially that confluence with the Minnesota River, it's a lot dirtier. So it's got a lot of time to just get gross from all the other sorts of development that's along those rivers. So the Namakagon's a lot further north. As we talked about with land cover, it's got a lot less development. So there's those like natural areas that kind of help to filter the water and keep it and absorb water and keep it clean of the runoff. And prevent more water from being created. So I would say it's probably because that area is a lot less developed, and also because there's less chance and that development has less chance to make an impact on the river's water quality.
Yeah. And I think we talked a little bit about it with our mussel talk
Yes, and
earlier
the
in the
mussels
week.
too.
Yeah, the mussels kind of like anchor the sediment down, so there's not as much of that like sediment murkiness too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
That's what I thought was so cool about that last video. It's like you can really see how crystal clear those waters are. It's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah. Well, we'll wait a couple more minutes, see if there's any more questions. I asked Maria this, but I'm going to ask you as well. Do you have one thing that you'd recommend to anyone who wants to maybe get involved in the Park Service or maybe even just be a historian?
Oh yeah. I think, okay. Well, there's always great opportunities to do your part and volunteer either with the St. Croix National Scenic Riverway, or our park name is so long, Mississippi National River and Recreation Area, which is why I didn't really include it as much. So volunteering is great. I think the audience that I selected for this presentation is a little bit older than fourth grade, but if there are any fourth graders in the audience, there's an Every Kid Outdoors National Park Service pass. And so, or maybe it's America the Beautiful Park. I'm not
You
100%
had
sure,
it right. Every kid
but
outdoors.
if you're Every Kid Outdoors, but if you were a fourth grader, There is a special pass just for you that gets you access entry to any national park throughout the country.
Mhm.
And it includes, I think it's just you. I don't think it includes like your immediate family, but or maybe it
Oh,
does.
it's everyone in your
It's
car.
everyone in your car. So see, I should have checked that, but I'm glad that you're here to back me up. So it's everybody that's in your car. And so you could get out and visit those parks. The St. Croix and the Mississippi Park, they don't have those entry fees, but other ones do, especially those big ones out west. So that's a great way to get out and explore your parks. Um, on my last slide, I had a photo of some people paddling. That's my favorite way to get out. And get involved with the river and enjoy it. And I think once you're out there enjoying the resources, that always is a good way to, remember that these are places that we're supposed to take care of too.
Yeah. And if any teachers out there are interested in getting your whole fourth grade class signed up for the Every Kid Outdoors, if you contact me, I can get those passes just directly mailed to your classroom. So just FYI,
That's great. Yeah.
shameless plug. I have a couple more questions. Are there less fish species in the Namakagon than the St. Croix?
Less fish species overall. Um, I'm not actually sure.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm a historian, not an aquatics biologist. Do you know?
I don't actually know. I will admit that I know a lot of things, but fish is not something I know a ton about in general.
Yeah. Yeah, our aquatics biologist actually wrote me a little note so I could pick out the species in that video that we looked at.
I love that.
Because I'm kind of on the same boat. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I could I'll see what I can do in answering that one. If I see you again, I might have an answer later. We'll see. And then is there anything that eats mussels?
Anything that eats mussels.
Mhm.
Well, we do sometimes with garlic and a little olive oil. But anything in the river that eats mussels. I'm I think I would think that like I think I've seen river otters
Mhm.
eating mussels. This isn't necessarily an eating mussels, but there are some invasive species of mussels that have a negative impact on the freshwater mussels that purify the water in the river. And so while they're not while those that's kind of a lot to get into, but while those species aren't eating those mussels, they can also have a negative impact and take some of those mussels away. But to answer your question, river otters are one of the things that eat mussels.
Yep, birds and some fish also. And then, oh, we're really getting into the science questions here. Do you know, is blue algae more harmful than green algae?
I do not know.
I don't
Um,
either.
I'm sorry about that.
These are excellent questions that I could send out to some of our science people.
Yeah. And I think really the thing is it's important to ask those good questions.
Mhm.
And then because it makes you curious, and curiosity is one of the ways that, we get into our jobs and for caring for these special places. So keep asking those good questions. Um,
Yeah, they're definitely something I'm going to look up after this. So it helps you learn for sure.
mhm.
Awesome. Well, I know I had a wonderful time. Thank you so much, Jade. If anyone has any more questions, you can send them to me and I can make sure they can either get to Jade or to whomever. Um, they said, it's okay. Thank you for trying. We have a lot of future biologists in our class.
That's great.
I love that. But we hope to see everyone tomorrow for our last day of Youth Summit. So thank you so much, Jade, for taking time out of your day to share your knowledge with us.
Thanks for having me.
And hopefully everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.